Discover the captivating story of a powerful and intelligent man, renowned as the most formidable commander after the French Revolution. From his legendary love for Josephine to his ambitious campaign in Egypt, where he envisioned conquering the world, and ultimately his fateful invasion of Russia with consequences he never anticipated. Don't miss this extraordinary recap of Napoleon's legendary life. Join us on this incredible journey.
The film kicks off with a scene where Louis XVI is being prepped for his execution. As they make their way, the crowd showers him with whatever they can find. The executioners prepare him, place his neck on the guillotine, and with one swift motion, Louis XVI meets his maker. Watching all this from a distance is none other than Napoleon, then just an army commander. Following this, the leader of the French liberation, who ordered Louis XVI's execution, supports the act with cold-hearted determination, promising freedom and protection for the oppressed and suffering. Napoleon Bonaparte then meets with Baris, the commander of the French army post-revolution. Baris briefs him about the imminent English invasion using their powerful warships and how they've taken over Tulong, emphasizing the need to liberate it. Napoleon assures him that capturing the harbor isn't necessary. Defeating the English forces will suffice. Fast forward to December 16, 1793, in Tulong, the French encampment. Relying on his artillery prowess, Napoleon constructs several new and advanced artillery units and scouts the harbor disguised to avoid recognition. He estimates the stationed English forces and decides to launch a night attack on the harbor. He first sends someone behind enemy gates, and once the coast is clear, he unleashes his artillery, welcoming the English with cannon fire. During the attack, Napoleon loses his horse to the English artillery, but escapes unscathed. The troops quickly breach the English fort using ladders, and Napoleon himself jumps into the fray, igniting the battle. Leaning on the might of his artillery, he manages to destroy most of their ships, successfully driving the English away. The next day, Paul Baris, head of the French army, promotes Napoleon to the rank of general. Napoleon keeps the cannonball that struck his horse as a memento. In a secret meeting, Baris warns Napoleon that the current leader of France is not suitable for its people, as his ambitious ideas have gone too far, spreading chaos and rebellion among the masses. In a session of the French Assembly, Baris turns the assembly members against the leader. As the French populace and other politicians follow suit, the leader attempts to flee. In a dramatic twist, he tries to shoot himself, but the bullet merely grazes his face, leaving him wounded yet alive. On July 27, 1794, the Reign of Terror comes to an end, setting free about 41,500 prisoners. We then see Napoleon alongside Paul Baris at a theater performance mocking Louis XVI's execution. Napoleon catches sight of a beautiful woman sitting next to Baris. Captivated, he continues to gaze at her until she notices and approaches him. Asking why he's staring, Napoleon first denies it but then admits, "Yeah, I was staring." Before she can introduce herself, Napoleon cuts her off, saying, "Don't tell me your name." In the next scene, a boy named Eugène Beauharnais visits Napoleon, asking for his father's sword that was taken before his execution. Napoleon initially refuses, saying a sword is a weapon and he can't just hand it over. However, he later retrieves it and goes to Eugène's home, discovering the beautiful woman is named Josephine, and she's Eugène and his sister's mother. At another party, Napoleon edges closer to Josephine, sitting beside her. Josephine later writes Napoleon a letter, expressing her enjoyment of his company. In the following scene, Josephine talks to Napoleon, revealing, "You know nothing about my past or my desires. I'm not nobility, and I was pregnant in prison because it was my only path to freedom." She shares stories about her late husband and his numerous affairs. Then, in a somewhat surprising move, she confesses her feelings for Napoleon. In the next scene, royalists gather people, inciting them to revolt. Paul Baris, commander of the French army, promptly meets with Napoleon, ordering him to act against the royalist uprising. On October 5, 1795, Napoleon and his forces crush the royalist rebellion with a blazing artillery assault, decimating many and forcing the rest to flee. Finally, Napoleon and Josephine tie the knot, and after a lavish dinner with loved ones, they share a warm, intimate moment. In July 1798, with dreams of world conquest swirling in his mind, Napoleon sails to Egypt, launching an attack with his troops and artillery. He even audaciously targets the pyramids with cannon fire. Unbeknownst to Napoleon, his dear wife Josephine is back home, entangled in an affair with another man. Afterward, Napoleon visits the mummified body of a pharaoh with his troops, respectfully removing his hat and approaching the ancient remains. It doesn't take long before one of his trusted officers, during a pleasant lunch, nervously shares, "I've heard from reliable sources that Josephine is cheating on you with a guy named Hippolyte Charles." Napoleon laughs it off, refusing to believe it. But his friend insists, "I wouldn't tell you if it weren't true." Upset, Napoleon tells him, "You're no longer welcome to eat with me." Later, in another tent, they discuss it again, and his friend reveals he learned of the affair through his mistress, who happens to be Josephine's maid. Napoleon immediately decides to return to France, leaving another general in charge during his absence. On the carriage ride back, Napoleon reads about his wife's infidelity in the newspaper. When he arrives at his estate, he inquires about Josephine's whereabouts from her maid, only to find out she's out of town, which deeply upsets him. He leaves but orders Josephine to return promptly. She arrives to find her belongings tossed out. Napoleon harshly chastises her, demanding, "How could you exploit my feelings?" But eventually, he forgives her, merely asking her to admit she's nothing without him, which Josephine repeats as instructed. In the continuation of their conversation, Napoleon tells Josephine, "I'm not like other men. I don't crumble at petty insecurities." Josephine counters, "If you want to be great, you must admit you're nothing without me or your mother." She urges him to repeat these words as he did with her, and thus, their romantic saga continues. In a meeting with France's elite, Napoleon is accused of abandoning his army in Egypt to return home. But Napoleon claims that everything fell apart in his absence, that France is a shadow of its former self. Money is depleted, and allies like Russia and England have taken Holland, while Austria and Russia have seized Italy, all while they remain powerless. Later, over breakfast, one of Napoleon's close associates suggests he could stage a coup, assuring that with Napoleon's backing, he could lead France, preserve the Republic, and fend off the royalists. Napoleon laughs it off, showing no interest in the proposal. Napoleon enlists all his marshals to clear out the incompetent folks in France. He appoints Talleyrand, a prince, as his chief diplomatic advisor. Talleyrand then warns Paul Baris to step down, which Baris agrees to, resulting in the forceful removal of all inept officials by Napoleon's marshals. Following this, a meeting is held in the French Assembly to temporarily govern the country with a three-consul system to prevent the royalists from seizing power. However, the Assembly members quickly accuse Napoleon of using his rebellious antics to grab the entire power. Napoleon and his representative take action to prevent chaos, leading to a scuffle. The representatives beat Napoleon, but he manages to escape, locking them out with the army's help. Napoleon's representative, however, draws a sword on him in front of the soldiers, declaring, "If Napoleon is a traitor to our nation, I'll take him out myself." He does this to gain the soldiers' trust, ensuring Napoleon's loyalty. The soldiers then storm into the assembly, quelling the representatives' uprising with force and weapons. Napoleon enters afterward and addresses them. In the next scene, Napoleon brings Josephine along, telling her, "Once we step out that door, everything changes, and I will ascend to power." He mingles with the hopeful crowd that has gathered to see him, and then he enters a carriage heading to the royal palace. Napoleon throws a lavish party at the palace, introducing his mother to Josephine. He then prepares to consult with Armand de Caulaincourt, the first consul's advisor, about peace with Russia and England. Napoleon inquires about the Russian Tsar, Alexander, to which Caulaincourt replies that Alexander is a proud prince who cherishes his reputation and fears ending up like his father, assassinated on the throne. Napoleon also questions the potential alliance with Russia and their inclination towards their former ally, England. Caulaincourt suggests that siding with the English offers more benefits. Meanwhile, at a royal party, Charles Talleyrand converses with his Austrian counterpart, emphasizing the necessity of peace with France, noting that Napoleon's peace letter has reached the Russians and their Tsar, and that Austria's peace with Russia might no longer be advantageous. Later, an impatient and furious Napoleon confronts the British envoy, declaring, "I sent your king a peace letter. If you don't respond, I'll take it as an insult." and I won't bother again. He also warns them, don't think you can do whatever you want just because you have ships. Talleyrand tells Napoleon that given the current state of the country and the looming external threats, a strong centralized power is necessary. He suggests that Napoleon should quickly declare his monarchy to strengthen France. Napoleon, not particularly keen on becoming king, smiles and nods, subtly agreeing with Talleyrand. Napoleon's relationship with Josephine is filled with love and affection, and they often find themselves caught up in romantic moments. During one such afternoon, Napoleon kisses Josephine and asks why, despite all their efforts, she hasn't gotten pregnant yet. Josephine suggests consulting her doctor for more tests, and Napoleon advises doing it quickly, as he needs an heir. Then, in a playful and romantic gesture, he crawls under the table, pulling Josephine with him for an intimate moment. Finally, the big day arrives. Napoleon and Josephine, following the usual traditions, prepare for his coronation in front of high-ranking religious figures. When the crown is brought to him, Napoleon, considering himself a champion of the people of France, raises it, places it on his head for a moment, and then hands it back, showing his lack of desire for kingship. With applause, he and Josephine exit the hall. As his royal portrait is being painted, Napoleon chats with Talleyrand, expressing that he has no interest in conquests and ambition. He only seeks peace and tranquility. During a dinner, Napoleon criticizes Josephine for not providing him with an heir yet, despite his impending departure for war. At the table, they bicker, throwing food and utensils at each other, leading Josephine to leave the dinner in distress. Napoleon follows her to the bedroom, consoles her, and kisses her goodbye before heading off to battle. In the Russian battlefield, Napoleon surveys the scene with a telescope. The scene shifts to show Tsar Alexander of Russia conversing with Emperor Francis about the war with France, assuring Francis of his unwavering support. On December 2, 1805, Napoleon positions his army in Austerlitz. After confirming with his men and spies that conditions are right for battle, he instructs his troops to get ready and lie in wait. Spotting thousands of Tsarist soldiers through his telescope, he executes his plan. As the Tsarist forces charge towards the French, Napoleon orders his troops to attack. The French launch a massive assault, forcing the Tsar's army to retreat onto a field of thin ice. At that moment, Napoleon commands a fierce artillery barrage, causing the ice to break and plunging the Russian army into the freezing waters, leading to their demise. Napoleon claims a decisive victory in this battle. After the battle, Emperor Francis of Austria visits Napoleon, who welcomes him warmly. Francis is amazed by Napoleon's lightning-fast attacks and prepares to make peace with France. Napoleon returns to France, enjoying happy times with Josephine once again. However, in the next scene, Napoleon's mother insists he needs an heir and has found an 18-year-old girl for him. She suggests that by sleeping with this girl, they can determine if the issue with having children lies with Napoleon or Josephine. Reluctantly, but with no other choice, Napoleon goes to the bedroom with the young girl. A few months later, his mother brings the news that the girl is pregnant with Napoleon's child. Napoleon talks to Josephine, expressing his love for her and his reluctance about the situation, saying he can't bear to part with her and they must find a solution. Napoleon then tells a trusted confidant that if the child turns out to be a boy, they must declare it as Josephine's child. But contrary to Napoleon's wishes, the confidant refuses, stating he cannot lie. Eventually, one night, Napoleon tells Josephine that despite his deep love for her, he must divorce her to ensure his lineage and maintain his rule. Josephine is heartbroken and cries upon hearing this. In the following scene, they officially separate in a ceremony attended by Josephine's two children. Despite Josephine's objections, Napoleon signs the divorce papers, ending their 15-year romance. Napoleon also arranges another estate for Josephine and her children to move into. Napoleon occasionally visits Josephine, spending time with her, and before leaving, he asks her to write to him daily so they can stay in touch through letters, bidding her farewell. Later, in the Treaty of Tilsit, Napoleon proposes to Tsar Alexander that he marry his sister. Alexander responds that one sister is already married and the other is only 15. But Napoleon reassures him, saying these are mere details and that an alliance between France and Russia would establish a powerful hold over Europe, effectively curbing England's influence. Napoleon takes Caulaincourt to meet with the Austrian ambassador to secure Prince Francis's approval for a marriage between Napoleon and his daughter, Marie-Louise, to forge an exceptional alliance between Austria and France. Marie-Louise, a young woman herself, comes to meet Napoleon, who is captivated by her beauty. The two marry, and within months, Napoleon becomes a father to a son with Marie-Louise. He promptly takes his son to visit Josephine, so she can also see the child. Months later, as Napoleon holds his son, he explains that Tsar Alexander has allied with England against France and plans to attack soon. This leads to another battle on September 7, 1812, resulting in 28,000 French casualties. Despite being embroiled in warfare, Napoleon continues writing letters to Josephine. He marches his army into a Russian city only to find it deserted. Having come to negotiate a new treaty and peace with Alexander, Napoleon is deeply frustrated by this move. Napoleon spends the night there, but is awakened by noise in the middle of the night. Looking out the window, he sees the entire city ablaze. He rushes out, questioning his troops about who did this, and his military commanders insist they had no part in it. Napoleon realizes that the Russians set the city on fire themselves, unwilling to negotiate or fight him directly, intending to frame him as a war criminal. The Russian campaign drags on, and Napoleon writes to Josephine about the harsh conditions, severe cold, disease, and desertions weakening his forces, leading to defeat. In December 1812, they return to France, following Russia's victory and its alliance with England and Austria against France. It's declared that Napoleon is exiled to the island of Elba for a year after his defeat in Russia and the loss of 460,000 soldiers. He must abdicate the throne, but will receive a pension for himself and his wife, and Josephine can keep her properties and receive an allowance. Napoleon stands up, and after signing the treaty, declares his love for France, stating he has lost only one battle and is willing to step down for France's glory. While in exile on Elba, Tsar Alexander, the treacherous prince, visits Josephine and starts a romantic relationship with her, news of which Napoleon reads in the newspaper, leaving him deeply upset. He writes to Josephine again, stating that his 365 days of exile are almost over, and he will soon return to France to see her again. Upon setting foot on French soil, Napoleon kneels, kissing the ground. Meanwhile, Josephine falls ill, and after initial examinations, the doctor diagnoses her with diphtheria, advising her and her daughter, who cares for her, that Josephine must rest. As soon as the news of Napoleon Bonaparte's return to France reaches Louis XVI, who has reclaimed the throne after Napoleon's abdication, things start to stir. Napoleon confronts Louis XVI's chief commander, who tells him to surrender and lay down his arms. Napoleon boldly claims he has no weapons and speaks directly to the armed troops before him, who are following Louis XVI's orders. Reminiscing about fighting alongside them against the Russians and the English, he asks, "Do you know me?" One soldier replies, "Yes." And suddenly, they all shout, "Yes, you are the Emperor of France." They embrace him, cheering, "Long live the Emperor!" Napoleon then makes his way to Josephine's residence, only to learn from her daughter that Josephine passed away 2 days before his arrival, leaving him heartbroken and in tears, saying, "It wasn't my fault." At the Congress of Vienna in March 1815, Duke Wellington, Arthur, stands before Alexander and other European monarchs, declaring that Napoleon Bonaparte must be stopped, warning that if they don't stand against this cunning beast, they'll lose everything. Meanwhile, on the opposing side, Napoleon explains to his military commanders that they must confront Duke Wellington, Arthur Wellesley, to prevent an alliance between Austria, Russia, Prussia, and England from jeopardizing France's position at Waterloo. Finally, in July 1815, the Battle of Waterloo commences. Duke Wellington leads the British forces from one side, and Napoleon Bonaparte leads the French troops on the opposing side. In the rainy weather, Napoleon quickly makes a shelter and prepares for the Russian army's arrival as allies of England. As Napoleon signals the start of the battle, several cannons fire. Seizing the opportunity, Napoleon joins the fight alongside his commanders and marshals before the Russian forces arrive, rallying his troops with hope and energy. Just as the French, driven by renewed vigor, charge at the British, Duke Wellington observes the scene through his telescope, witnessing the British on the brink of defeat. Suddenly, the Russian forces arrive from behind, launching an attack that forces Napoleon to surrender. In July 1815, aboard the HMS Bellerophon in Plymouth, they take Napoleon into custody. Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, arrives to announce Napoleon Bonaparte's exile to the island of St. Helena, where he will live under strict security for the rest of his life. With his correspondence closely monitored, Napoleon is transported there by ship, spending his final days with thoughts and whispers of Josephine echoing in his mind. He encounters two children, questions them about history, and asks who burned Moscow. When they reply they don't know, Napoleon admits, "I did." He takes a final sip of wine, thinking of Josephine, and falls from his chair, passing away. It's revealed that Napoleon died on May 5, 1821, after 6 years of exile on St. Helena. The film concludes with statistics on the casualties from his various battles. Napoleon's final words were simply, "France, Army, Josephine."